It was a Tuesday, October 15th, 2023, gray and damp outside, the kind of day that mirrored the fluorescent chill inside the offices of Innovate Solutions Incorporated. I remember the condensation on the glass walls of Arthur Vance's office, blurring the view of the humming server racks just beyond. He'd called me in precisely at 4 p.m. Punctuality was one of Arthur's performative virtues. I sat opposite him, the expensive leather of the visitor chair sighing under my weight. I'd been with the company for nearly 20 years, since it was just Arthur, myself, and a handful of hopefuls crammed into a tiny rented space. Now he sat behind a vast expanse of polished mahogany, looking uncomfortable. He fiddled with a sleek silver pen, avoiding my eyes. Then he dropped the bomb, though he tried to couch it in corporate jargon. "Matthew," he began, his voice tight, "we've been reviewing budgets, market pressures, you understand. Restructuring for efficiency." He finally looked up, his gaze skittering off mine. "Your role? Well, frankly, Matthew, your compensation package has become difficult to justify. We need to make leaner choices. You're just too expensive. Too expensive. After 2 decades. After building the very technological bedrock this company stood upon." The words hung there, clinical and brutal. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a detachment that surprised even myself. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded slowly, absorbing the impact. 20 years of loyalty, late nights, weekends sacrificed, culminating in being reduced to a line item, a cost deemed excessive. The irony, thick and suffocating, was that Arthur, in his infinite wisdom and cost-cutting zeal, had absolutely no idea that the core technology driving nearly 80% of Innovate Solutions revenue, the technology embedded in our flagship OptiStream predictive maintenance suite, wasn't actually owned by the company. It was owned by me. He had just fired the man who held the patent.my journey with Innovate Solutions started back in the summer of 2005. Raleigh was buzzing with tech startups, and Arthur Vance, then full of infectious energy and visionary rhetoric, convinced me to leave a stable, if somewhat uninspiring, job at a larger corporation. I was 32, eager to build something meaningful. Innovate Solutions was initially focused on bespoke software solutions for local manufacturing businesses. We were small, agile, and worked incredibly hard. Arthur was the salesman, the face. I was the engine room, the lead architect and developer, often pulling all-nighters to meet deadlines or fix critical bugs. My initial contract was fairly standard for a small startup, granting stock options that seemed promising but were heavily diluted over subsequent funding rounds. Crucially, drafted by a budget lawyer, Arthur knew it contained somewhat ambiguous language about intellectual property developed during employment, typical boilerplate but lacking the ironclad clauses larger firms used. In those early days, trust was the main currency. We celebrated small victories together, commiserated over setbacks. My wife, Sarah, often joked that the office couch saw more of me than our own sofa. I poured everything I had into the company, believing in Arthur's vision, believing we were building something lasting, something shared. Around 2010, I started tinkering in my spare time, driven by a persistent problem I saw recurring across different clients, predicting industrial equipment failure. Existing solutions were clunky, reactive. I envisioned a proactive system using real-time sensor data and a novel analytical approach. This wasn't a company project. It was a personal intellectual challenge pursued on my own computer using my own software licenses, often late at night after my official workday was long over. I documented my progress meticulously in personal notebooks and digital logs, dated and timestamped. By late 2011, I had a breakthrough, a core algorithm that showed incredible promise. It was elegant, efficient, and fundamentally different. Recognizing its potential significance and remembering the slightly vague IP clause in my contract, I took a crucial step. Using my own savings, I consulted a patent attorney, Dr. Evelyn Reed, who specialized in software patents. We worked carefully, ensuring the application clearly delineated the invention as conceived and developed independently prior to any specific company directive or resource allocation related to the specific concept. The patent application for the system and method for real-time industrial equipment anomaly detection was filed in early 2012 under my name, Matthew Harrison, as the sole inventor. It wasn't until mid-2012, after the core concepts were already documented and the patent application was well underway, that Arthur, facing pressure to find a more scalable product, asked me to explore predictive maintenance solutions. "Matt," he'd said, "we need something big, something recurring. Think you can cook up some magic?" I saw the opportunity. I presented my concept, the one I'd been developing privately. Arthur was ecstatic. "This is it. This is the future." We agreed I would integrate my work into a new company initiative, which eventually became the OptiStream suite. I never explicitly signed over the patent rights. Instead, understanding the startup's limited funds and wanting to see my invention succeed, I granted Innovate Solutions an implicit, informal license to use the technology as long as I was employed there, leading its development. It was a handshake agreement backed by emails where I discussed integrating my existing work. Arthur, caught up in the excitement and perhaps assuming standard work-for-hire principles automatically applied despite the documented pre-existence and my patent application never formalized the IP transfer. He saw me as loyal, indispensable Matt, the tech wizard. The company grew exponentially thanks to OptiStream. We hired more engineers, marketing teams, support staff. My salary increased, commensurate with my role as chief architect, but Arthur retained majority ownership and control. I remained loyal, guiding the technical team, refining the algorithms, ensuring OptiStream stayed ahead of the curve. I felt a sense of pride, ownership in a way, even if the company wasn't technically mine. I was stable, respected, and financially comfortable, if not extravagantly wealthy like Arthur was becoming. I never imagined that loyalty would be repaid with dismissal, justified by the very salary I earned building his fortune. The signs started subtly, maybe 18 months before that final Tuesday. Arthur hired a new COO, Bradley Croft, a slick MBA type with a reputation as a turnaround specialist, which often translates to hatchet man. Bradley started implementing layers of bureaucracy we never had before. Suddenly, every minor expense required multiple approvals. Project timelines were scrutinized with almost paranoid intensity, and closed-door meetings between Arthur, Bradley, and the finance department became frequent occurrences. My team, the core OptiStream development group, felt the chill first. Requests for new software tools or upgraded hardware, previously routine, were delayed or denied outright with vague explanations about budget constraints. Bradley seemed particularly interested in process documentation. He scheduled several meetings with me, ostensibly to better understand the OptiStream architecture and development pipeline for strategic planning. He asked detailed questions about knowledge transfer, code commenting standards, and system documentation. At the time, I chalked it up to typical corporate oversight, perhaps a bit excessive, but I cooperated fully, explaining our robust internal wiki, code repositories, and commenting practices. Looking back, he was assessing how easily my knowledge could be replicated or replaced. Around 6 months before the end, Arthur started making comments in management meetings about legacy costs and the need to infuse new blood into the engineering teams. He'd talk about the lower salary expectations of recent graduates compared to senior staff. He never mentioned me directly, but the implication hung in the air. Simultaneously, 2 junior engineers were assigned to shadow me and my senior developers, supposedly to accelerate their learning curve on the core OptiStream systems. They were bright kids, but their questions often felt less about learning the why and more about documenting the how, procedures, access keys, specific configurations. Suspicion began to curdle in my gut. felt less like mentorship and more like knowledge extraction. I started paying closer attention. I noticed Arthur and Bradley having hushed conversations after I left meetings. I saw Bradley reviewing salary bands with HR, his door slightly ajar. An email from Arthur to Bradley, accidentally forwarded to a wider group including me before being quickly recalled, had the subject line Phase 2 Cost Optimization. I only saw the subject, but it was enough. The final red flag came about a month before my dismissal. During a budget review, Arthur questioned the licensing costs for a specialized compiler I'd insisted we use for a critical OptiStream module, a tool I knew delivered significant performance gains. "Is this absolutely necessary, Matt?" he asked, tapping his pen. "Are there cheaper alternatives? Every penny counts right now." It struck me as odd. The cost was negligible compared to the revenue OptiStream generated. He seemed focused on trimming my specific operational requests, my areas of influence. The man who once celebrated every technical advancement I brought forward was now nickel-and-diming the very tools that ensured our product's edge. The picture was becoming clearer. They weren't just cutting costs. They were preparing to cut me, assuming the golden goose, OptiStream, would keep laying eggs without its original caretaker. The foundation of trust, built over 2 decades, felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet. The Tuesday meeting with Arthur confirmed my worst fears. Too expensive. The phrase echoed as I walked out of his office, carrying a small box with the few personal items I kept there: a framed photo of Sarah and our daughter, Emily, a collection of programming books, a worn coffee mug. The security guard escorting me, someone I'd shared countless morning greetings with, looked embarrassed. It was a humiliating clinical extraction. They disabled my network access while I was still in Arthur's office. Efficient, I'll give them that. But Arthur and Bradley had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They saw me as an overpriced employee, easily replaceable. They completely overlooked the legal status of the intellectual property that was the company's lifeblood. That evening, after explaining the situation to a shocked but supportive Sarah, I didn't rage. I didn't drown my sorrows. Instead, I went to my home office, opened my secure filing cabinet, and retrieved the file labeled Project Nightingale, my old code name for the predictive maintenance algorithm. Inside were copies of everything: my original employment contract from 2005 with its ambiguous IP clause, my dated notebooks detailing the algorithm's conception, time-stamped digital logs from my personal computer showing development work predating any company directive, records of my personal expenses for software licenses and patent attorney consultations, email correspondence with Arthur where I discussed integrating my existing work into the company's new product initiative, and most importantly, the official documentation for U.S. patent number 11,345,812, System and Method for Real-Time Industrial Equipment Anomaly Detection, granted in 2014, listing Matthew Harrison as the sole inventor and owner. I had meticulously kept these records not out of inherent distrust back then, but because Dr. Reed had stressed the importance of documenting independent invention. Over the years, as the company grew and Arthur's focus shifted more towards profit than partnership, that diligence felt increasingly prudent. My strategy wasn't born of instant rage, but of a cold, methodical resolve that settled in my chest. This wasn't just about money. It was about the principle. It was about 20 years of dedication being discarded like refuse. It was about Arthur's arrogant assumption that he owned everything I created. The next morning, Wednesday, October 16, 2023, I called Dr. Evelyn Reed. I explained the situation calmly and concisely. She listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, there was a pause. "Matthew," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Based on the documentation you've described and our previous work, your position is exceptionally strong. They've terminated your employment, which likely terminates any implied license they assumed they had. Their continued use of your patented technology constitutes infringement." We spent the next few days preparing. Dr. Reed and her team drafted a formal cease and desist letter. It was polite but unequivocal, outlining my ownership of patent number 11,345,812, citing the specific claims relevant to the OptiStream suite, noting that any implied license was terminated upon my dismissal, and demanding that Innovate Solutions immediately halt all use, sale, and marketing of any products incorporating the patented technology. It also included a clear statement of my intent to pursue all available legal remedies, including damages for infringement, if they failed to comply within 10 business days. We compiled an appendix with key supporting documents, the patent certificate, excerpts from my development logs predating the official project start, and relevant email communications. We decided to send the letter via registered mail and email to Arthur Vance directly, CCNG Bradley Croft, and Innovate Solutions General Counsel. Return receipt requested. There was no malice in my actions, only precision. Arthur had made a business decision based on incomplete information. Now he would receive the missing data. The letter was sent on Monday, October 21st, 2023. I tracked the delivery online. It arrived at Innovate Solutions headquarters the next day. The email read receipt pinged on my laptop shortly after. Then silence. For 3 days, nothing. I imagined the frantic meetings, the hurried calls to their own lawyers, the dawning realization of the mess they were in. I spent those days organizing my home office, updating my resume more out of habit than necessity, and spending time with Sarah and Emily trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. The calm before the storm. The storm broke on Friday, October 25th. My phone rang, an unfamiliar number, but the caller ID showed Innovate Solutions' main line. It wasn't Arthur. It was the company's lawyer, a man named David Chin from a prominent Raleigh law firm. His tone was conciliatory, bordering on desperate. "Mr. Harrison," he began, "we've received the correspondence from Dr. Reed. Clearly, there's been a significant misunderstanding regarding the intellectual property underpinning the OptiStream product. Arthur Vance and the management team would like to discuss this matter urgently to find an amicable resolution." I referred him directly to Dr. Reed, stating calmly that all communication should go through my legal counsel. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. I was no longer the supplicant employee, I was the patent holder whose technology they couldn't legally use. Dr. Reed handled the initial negotiations. Their first offer was insulting, a modest lump sum payment for retroactive licensing and a vague promise of future royalties. Dr. Reed, following my instructions, rejected it outright. Our position was clear: immediate cessation of infringement or negotiation of a formal, robust licensing agreement on my terms, reflecting the technology's true value and the bad faith nature of my dismissal. The alternative was an injunction and a lawsuit for damages, which would likely cripple the company, potentially forcing bankruptcy or a fire sale. Innovate Solutions was trapped. OptiStream wasn't just a product, it was their entire future. Halting sales and support was unthinkable. Their lawyers knew the strength of my patent and the documentation trail. A court battle would be lengthy, expensive, and likely end very badly for them. Arthur Vance, the man who deemed me too expensive, was now facing the reality that not employing me was going to cost him infinitely more. After a week of intense back and forth between Dr. Reed and Mr. Chin, they conceded. Arthur wanted a meeting. Just him and me. Dr. Reed advised against it, but I agreed on the condition she be present. We met not at Innovate Solutions, but at Dr. Reed's neutral office downtown on November 8th. Arthur looked diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary anxiety. He tried to apologize, stumbling over words about oversight and regrettable decisions. I listened impassively. "Arthur," I said finally, keeping my voice level, "you didn't just make a mistake. You discarded 20 years of loyalty based on a spreadsheet calculation without understanding the foundation you were kicking away. This isn't personal anymore, it's business. And the business reality is you need my technology." Dr. Reed then laid out our terms, a substantial upfront payment acknowledging past unlicensed use, far exceeding my severance or previous salary expectations, and ongoing royalty payments based on a significant percentage of all OptiStream-related revenue secured by regular audits. Furthermore, the license agreement would be non-exclusive, meaning I retained the right to license the technology to others, and it would contain stringent clauses protecting my rights should Innovate Solutions ever be acquired. Arthur balked at the royalty percentage and the non-exclusivity, but faced with the alternative, immediate cessation and legal action, he had no choice. He signed the preliminary agreement that day. The final licensing contracts were executed before the end of November 2023. Bradley Croft, the COO who helped orchestrate my exit, was quietly let go a few weeks later, collateral damage in the fallout. Justice wasn't about seeing Arthur ruined, it was about rectifying the profound disrespect and ensuring the value of my contribution was properly, legally, and financially recognized. Life looks very different now. The settlement and the ongoing royalties from the Innovate Solutions license agreement provided more financial security than I ever had while working there. It was vindicating certainly, but the experience left deeper marks. The sense of betrayal by someone I'd trusted and worked alongside for 2 decades doesn't simply vanish with a legal victory. It changed my perspective on loyalty in the corporate world. I didn't take another job. Instead, using a portion of the funds, I established my own consulting firm, Harrison Analytical Solutions LLC. I work from my home office, setting my own hours, choosing projects that genuinely interest me, often helping smaller companies develop their own specialized data analysis capabilities. Ironically, my expertise in predictive maintenance is now sought after by various industries, and because the license with Innovate is non-exclusive, I'm free to leverage my knowledge and even aspects of my patented methods within legal boundaries. For other clients, I don't interact with Arthur or anyone from Innovate Solutions beyond the automated royalty statements and audit reports handled by Dr. Reed's firm. I hear through the industry grapevine that the company is still operational, still reliant on OptiStream, but operating under the weight of the licensing fees they now pay me. Arthur remains CEO, but his reputation took a significant hit. Sometimes I reflect on those final days at Innovate. The cold dismissal, the walkout with my box, the sting of being called too expensive. It wasn't the ending I'd envisioned after 20 years. But in retrospect, Arthur's short-sightedness was the catalyst for my independence. He severed the ties that bound my invention to his company, freeing us both in a way neither of us anticipated. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that my work, the product of my own intellect and effort, is finally valued correctly, secured by law rather than misplaced trust. I spend more time with Sarah and Emily now. We travel more, worry less about finances. The stress that unknowingly permeated my life for years has largely dissipated. It wasn't revenge I sought, not in the fiery, destructive sense. It was equilibrium. It was demonstrating that value isn't just measured by salary and loyalty shouldn't be a 1A street. Arthur Vance learned that lesson the hard way. He learned that sometimes the most expensive employee is the one you can least afford to lose, especially when he holds the key to the kingdom, or in this case, the patent.